So the first time you go to a doctor and you say, my voice doesn't work, blah, 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 they assume it's some typical respiratory problem and they treat you accordingly. You know, might be this, you know, try these solutions. None of those made any difference. I tried, let's see, we assumed it was some kind of strep throat. We assumed it was just normal laryngitis. We, you know, did all the normal treatments for that stuff. Went to an ear, nose, throat person to see if there was any kind of a tumor in there. Eventually ended up under an MRI machine, finding out what's wrong with my brain, trying to decide if I had, you know, aneurysms or other kinds of, maybe there was a stroke I didn't know about. So we went through all those options. Eventually, I ended up in a psychologist's office with the assumption that my problem was psychological, because spasmodic dysphonia has this weird characteristic that you can speak okay to your cat, as I could. You can do a poem, sometimes you can sing, very much like a stutterer, but you can't have a normal conversation with a normal person. And you especially can't talk on the telephone. That's just the hardest thing if you have spasmodic dysphonia. So when you explain to a doctor, in this context I can talk, in this context I can't talk, it sounds like a psychological problem. And so, you know, they could be forgiven for saying, let's look into this, right? I mean, that's just logical. So the psychologist assumed that also was the problem, because it looked like maybe stress was behind it. She suggested Valium as a potential solution. I decided not to try that route because I was pretty sure, just internally, it didn't feel like stress was the cause, because I didn't feel like I was having more problems on stressful days or less problems on unstressful days. So that just didn't feel right. So I decided to not try that. And it wasn't until after I had Googled and gotten a name for this condition, spasmodic dysphonia, that I could take it back to my doctors, and ended up taking the same route from my general practitioner back to the ear, nose, throat people. And they said, yeah, you know, I think there's a doctor in our system. This was the Kaiser system, very good doctors, by the way. He thought there was a doctor who knew a lot about this. So he referred me to Dr. Smith. And when I went into her office, I started talking, if you can call it that, in my halting spasmodic dysphonia voice. It took her 5 seconds to say spasmodic dysphonia. So for the expert, it's an easy diagnosis. It's just tough to find that expert. My doctors, by the way, are very good. It's just that this condition is rare enough that most doctors have never seen even one example of it. The day I found out that my condition had a name, and it was spasmodic dysphonia, and finally I could research seriously, I mean, I could really dig in and get to the bottom of it, it felt great. Like, it was empowering. It felt like, oh, you know, finally I can take my fate in my own hands, at least a little bit. I can do something about this. Now, as it turns out, that was a hard thing to do, and it required, you know, a doctor to ultimately fix me. But it felt good just to know what the condition was. And I imagine there are lots of people out there who haven't yet figured out the diagnosis for their voice problems, who have some good news coming, that A, it's got a name, you're not alone, and B, there is something you can do about it.